Hi, everybody. Broadcasting from home, back with a recorded Dvar Torah for Parshat Va'era. This is called More Than Enough. When God initiated a relationship with Moses, our teacher was charged with the responsibility, the holy task of being an emissary of the divine. However, as we know from his incipient criminal record, it was not a given that the people would heed Moses' words, especially when he claims to represent a deity who had receded into the backgrounds while life was made worse and worse. Understandably, the question of how Moses was to refer to God arose, as the very name by which we are to address the Holy One appeared to be in flux. Awesomely, but ambiguously, God identifies with the elusive phrase, Ehyeh asher ehyeh, I will be as I will be, deferring reference perhaps infinitely. Moses is left representing a God who eludes and transcends any name. Or perhaps, Ehyeh implies that God can occupy many names. I will be as I will be may mean that God's identity is continuously revealed to us, with a different aspect of the divine disclosed according to how God wills, or even according to what we need. So, as a renewed relationship with the people of Israel is forged, how God decides to be introduced is another way of telling the people what they need to hear, what it means to have the divine in their midst, in this very moment. And right in the beginning of this week's Parshah, Va'era, God makes the decision to finally reveal the Shem HaMeforash, the explicit, most intimate name we know associated with the divine, Yud-Keh Vav-Keh. Why was this the moment that God chose to, at long last, make this most holy name available to the people? As God prepares Moses to approach Pharaoh and get the liberation of the children of Israel underway, God informs Moshe just how God is to be identified in being reintroduced to the people. God spoke to Moses and said to him, I am Yud-Keh Vav-Keh. I had appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as Kel Shad-ai, but my name Yud-Keh Vav-Keh was not disclosed to them. Whereas before, with our ancestors, God had only identified God's self by one name, but now at this propitious moment, God has decided to let the people in a little bit further, a little bit deeper, allowing them a more intimate and full relation with the divine. However, before we discuss what God wanted to ensure in allowing the people to know the Shem HaMeforash, it is worth exploring how the previous name, Kel Shad-ai, had constructed a certain image of the Holy One, and thus what was possible as God's people. The name Kel Shad-ai is unique amongst God's other monikers, as it is a descriptive title, but one to which the referent is not clear. Whereas the name, for instance, Hashem Tzvakos, one can easily comprehend that it refers to God's role as the master of the heavenly panoply. But what is the Shaddai of which Hashem is the God? Bible scholar Stephen Geller claims that the word is related to the Assyrian Sadapu, meaning mountain. Indeed, God had been largely encountered on mountains at significant moments in our people's early history, whether disembarking from the Ark on Mount Ararat at the Akedah, or most recently at the Burning Bush. As God begins a new stage of a relationship with the people of Israel, it is one that will not be restricted to those miraculous mountaintop moments, but rather brought down to earth in the midst of what is happening down below. Shifting away from Kel Shad-ai could be communicating to the people that God is with them even amidst their suffering and will continue on in their midst as they enter into history. As Rashi notes, whenever God made a promise previously, it was always identified as El Shaddai. But now that encountering God is not merely at certain heightened experiences, but rather as the backbone of a real relationship, there is a need to move to a new name. In the Talmud, the rabbis had a different interpretation of what Kel Shad-ai means, and given their love of wordplay, of course its meaning is found in a pun. As Reish Lakish said, what does the verse I am Kel Shad-ai mean? I am the one who said to the world, die. Enough. Die. Reish Lakish said, when the Holy One created the seas, they kept expanding until the Holy One reproved them. But why was this the name by which our people knew of the divine? The Chassidic master Meir Shiloach saw a connection between this name and the experience of the people. Citing Rashi, the Meir Shiloach writes that the one who said to the world, enough, will also say to my sufferings, enough. The purpose of creation was so that God's majesty could be recognized, and thus God said, enough, for from this God could be known. Now this requires some explanation. When we think of the creative act, we imagine that its essence is generative, productive. God created the cosmos from nothing, so to create seems to mean to add more to what was missing before. However, a necessary complement in creation is also the act of restraint. If all things were allowed to continue on without bound, each element of creation would be, chas v'shalom, a cancer, metastasizing in its unimpeded growth. For there to be existence, it needs to be created. But for there to be a world, one that can be sustained, we must also have restraint. Rashi's connection between God's power of limitation to make the world and the eventual cessation of our experiencing the troubles this world has to offer is tantalizing. Why wouldn't God be satisfied with the people of Israel continuing to utilize the name Shad-ai, especially in unprecedented times of suffering, like the increased hardships of servitude in Egypt? I think it is because, as the situation experienced by the people of Israel was primed to change, so too their relationship to God had to evolve. The first reading of Shad-ai saw Hashem as the God of unique, special experiences, and the second reading saw God as that which gives us succor and resilience in the midst of suffering. However, both of those dynamics possess a deferral of agency by the people themselves. We wait around for the next spectacular theophany on the mountaintop, or we see our relationship with God only allowing us to tarry in the drudgery of real life. As the people are to be prepared for liberation, the holy and the divine can no longer be seen as other than this life, other than this world, way up on the mountain, or way off in the future. Yes, in a couple of weeks, God will once more disclose God's self in a spectacle, but the result of that climactic revelation is the receiving of the Torah. God's wisdom entrusted in our hands to be partners in making the world as it ought to be. At this propitious moment, standing on the precipice of a future that is about to arrive, the people are inducted into a more intimate and mature connection with God, empowered to know the truest name of the divine. This is God letting us know that the deepest and realist relationship with Hashem is the one when we can take the step forward, meeting the divine in the middle. Shabbat Shalom.